All right, let's dive into another deep dive. And today, we're tackling something a lot of you have been asking about. Hydration.
Yeah, seems simple, right?
You'd think so, but trust me, there's more to it than meets the eye. We're actually basing this whole deep dive on a video by Dr. Carlos Jaramillo.
Oh, the Colombian doctor.
That's the one. He had some really interesting insights on hydration and, well, he kind of blew my mind a little.
Color me intrigued. I'm ready to get refreshed.
Okay, so first things first, we all know our bodies need water. But do you actually know how much of us is made up of water?
I have a feeling you're about to tell me.
You bet. A whole 60% of the human body is water.
Wow. 60%? That's way more than I would have guessed.
It's not just in our blood either. It's in our cells, pretty much everywhere. Which, I mean, that just shows how important water is for, well, everything our bodies do.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense.
So speaking of things we've all heard a million times, drink 8 to 10 glasses of water a day. But is that really the magic number? I mean, is that true for everyone?
Well, I think it's a decent starting point, but there's a lot more to consider.
Right.
Like how active you are, where you live, even your overall health. Those things can all affect how much water you actually need.
So we're already seeing how hydration isn't one size fits all.
Absolutely.
Now, here's something else that really surprised me. And I don't know if you've ever heard this, but
Yeah.
Dr. Jaramillo talked about how drinking too much water can actually be harmful.
Really? That seems a little counterintuitive.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you would think more water is always better.
Yeah.
But it all has to do with electrolytes. Things like sodium, potassium, magnesium. If you drink too much water, you can actually dilute those electrolytes, and that can really mess things up.
Wow, so it's all about balance.
Exactly. You need enough to function, but not so much that it throws off your whole system.
Makes sense.
All right, so we've kind of busted that 8 glasses myth,
Mhm.
and we've seen that overhydration is a thing. Now, what about drinking during meals? A lot of people drink a ton while they're eating. What does Dr. Jaramillo say about that?
Well, apparently that can actually be a problem for digestion.
Really? Why is that?
Think about it. When you drink a lot during a meal, you're essentially diluting all those important digestive enzymes and the stomach acid that helps you break down your food.
Huh, interesting. So what's the alternative?
Well, Dr. Jaramillo suggested having a glass of water before your meal, after, or even between meals, but not so much during.
Gotcha. So we've talked about how much to drink and when to drink it.
Yeah.
But what about what we're actually drinking? I've always thought plain water was the best, but Dr. Jaramillo actually suggests there's more to it.
He makes a good point.
Yeah.
If you think about water in nature, it's not just pure H2O.
Right.
It picks up minerals along the way, and those minerals, those electrolytes, they actually help our bodies absorb and use the water properly.
Oh.
So maybe plain water isn't the complete answer.
So does that mean all those fancy sports drinks are the way to go then?
Not necessarily, no. They often have a ton of sugar, artificial flavors, and stuff that's not really great for you. And, remember, we're going for a conscious hydration here.
Right. So how do we get those electrolytes without all the junk?
Well, Dr. Jaramillo suggested adding a pinch of Himalayan salt to your water, or you could find electrolyte tablets or powders.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of things we add to our water, let's talk about filtering our water. I know you're pretty passionate about that.
Absolutely. It's amazing what can end up in our tap water. Even if it looks and tastes fine, there could be things like heavy metals, plastic residue from the pipes, even pesticides.
Wow, okay. That's not something you want to think about.
No, not really. So yeah, I think a good water filter is a must. And the good news is, there are so many options out there, from simple pitcher filters to whole house systems.
We could probably do a whole other deep dive just on the different kinds of filters.
Yeah.
But for now, let's stick with what Dr. Jaramillo had to say about plastic water bottles. I have a feeling this is where things get a little inconvenient.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Yeah.
As convenient as those single-use bottles are, they do come with some problems. There's the whole issue of plastic residues and BPA leaching into the water, especially if those bottles get heated up in the sun.
Yeah, I've heard about those chemicals. What's the big deal with them?
Well, they've been linked to some pretty serious health problems, things like hormone disruption, even certain cancers. And then, of course, there's the whole environmental impact of all that plastic.
Right, of course.
Dr. Jaramillo actually mentioned some research that suggests we might be ingesting the equivalent of a credit card's worth of microplastics every year.
Wait, seriously? A credit card? That's terrifying.
It's a pretty sobering thought. And even though we're still learning about the full impact of microplastics on our health, it's definitely a good reason to reduce our plastic use as much as we can.
Absolutely. So are we all doomed to carry around big glass jugs of water? What are the options?
No, not at all. Reusable stainless steel bottles or glass bottles are great alternatives. They come in so many cool designs these days, and you can even get them with built-in filters for extra peace of mind.
Awesome. So ditch the plastic, go reusable.
Got it.
What else should we be thinking about when it comes to, making these conscious hydration choices?
Well, Dr. Jaramillo really emphasizes the importance of listening to your body. Don't just drink water mindlessly. Pay attention to how thirsty you feel, think about how active you've been, the weather, all those factors.
It's about personalized hydration.
Exactly. And it really comes down to making choices that benefit both our bodies and the planet.
I love that. It's like mindfulness, but for hydration. Really being present with our water intake.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, there's one more thing I wanted to bring up that really got me thinking. We've been talking about our own health and stuff, but what about the bigger picture? All those plastic bottles, what happens to them?
Yeah, that's a whole other issue, isn't it?
It is. Think about all that plastic. It's a lot. And it's not just the bottles themselves.
Right.
It takes energy to make them, to ship them around.
Yeah.
All that contributes to pollution and climate change. It's a pretty big footprint.
It really makes you think. Choosing reusable bottles isn't just about us. It's about the planet, too.
Exactly. It's all connected. What we do affects everything else.
So zooming out a bit, what's the main takeaway here?
I think it's about awareness. We've just been drinking water without really thinking about it. But once you start to see the whole picture, how our bodies use water, what's in it, the impact on the environment, it changes things.
It's like going from autopilot to actually being in control.
That's a good way to put it. And that's what Dr. Jaramillo calls it, conscious hydration. It's about making choices that are good for us and for the planet.
I love that. Conscious hydration. It's like mindfulness for how we drink water.
I like that. It's about tuning into our bodies, making choices that match our values.
Okay, so what can people actually do to make this happen?
Well, first off, get a good water filter. It makes a huge difference.
Agreed. And ditch those single-use plastic bottles like we talked about.
Absolutely. Reusable bottles are the way to go. And if you're worried about electrolytes, a pinch of Himalayan salt can help, or some lemon. There are also electrolyte tablets you can find.
Great tips. And it's always a good idea to talk to your doctor too, right?
Yeah.
What works for one person might not work for another.
Definitely. No one-size-fits-all solution here.
This has been so eye-opening. I feel like I've learned so much about something I thought was so simple.
Me too. It's amazing what you discover when you dig a little deeper.
Before we wrap up, I have one more thought. We talked about filtering water, but what about the energy it takes to run those filters? Is there a way to make sure we're not creating more problems while trying to get clean water?
That's a great question. It's definitely something to consider, and it might deserve its own deep dive someday. But it's all about finding that balance, right? Clean water is important, but so is being mindful of how much energy we use.
So how do we figure that out? What should people be thinking about?
Well, first, it helps to know where your water comes from. Your local water utility probably has information on their website about where they get the water and how they treat it.
Good idea. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, it's a good starting point. And when it comes to filters, simpler is usually better. Things like gravity filters, they don't use any electricity at all. They just rely on natural processes.
Kind of like slow food, but for water.
Exactly. Slow and steady, that's the key to sustainability.
So we want to filter our water, but we also want to be mindful of the energy it takes. It's like a catch-22. How do we find that sweet spot?
Well, I think it comes back to conscious hydration. It's about making choices that match our values. We have to weigh the pros and cons and make the best decisions we can.
Okay, so practical tips. What can people actually do?
Ditch the bottled water as much as possible. Tap water filtered at home is a good alternative. And if you do buy bottled water, look for brands that are eco-conscious, using recycled materials and all of that.
And of course, reusable water bottles. Can't stress that enough.
For sure, every little bit helps. And we can always support policies that encourage water conservation and better infrastructure.
It's amazing how a simple thing like drinking water leads to all these bigger questions. It really shows how everything is connected.
It does, doesn't it? It makes you realize that even small actions can have a ripple effect.
Okay, one last thing before we move on. We've talked a lot about the physical stuff, but what about the mental and emotional side of water? What it means to us.
Oh, that's interesting. I like how you're always thinking about the bigger picture. It's true, we don't always stop to think about those aspects of our basic needs.
Exactly. Water is so essential, but we rarely think about its deeper meaning, how it affects us emotionally.
There's something almost meditative about drinking water, isn't there? It's refreshing, it revives us, it can be very grounding.
And there's a symbolism too. Water represents purity, clarity, new beginnings. A lot of cultures see it as sacred, a life-giving force.
Absolutely. Think about rituals that involve water, baptisms, cleansing ceremonies, even washing our hands. They all have this deeper meaning connecting us to something bigger.
It's incredible how something as simple as water can be so profound. What can we learn from it? What kind of wisdom does it hold?
That's a beautiful question. Maybe it teaches us about balance, about going with the flow, about adapting to change. It reminds us that we're all connected, part of a larger ecosystem.
I love that. Water as a teacher, a guide. It's like a whole new way of thinking about hydration.
It is. It shows how powerful curiosity can be. When we dig deeper, we find so much more than we expected.
This conversation has been amazing. We went from practical tips to the environment to philosophy, and it all started with water. I feel like we've just scratched the surface.
I agree. There's always more to learn. And that's what's so great about these deep dives. We never know where they'll take us.
And speaking of journeys, before we go, I want to leave everyone with something to think about. We talked about water literally, but what about the things that sustain us metaphorically? The things that inspire us, that bring us joy and purpose.
Yeah, those metaphorical wells we draw from, the things that really give us energy and make life feel, well, more full.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what are those things for you? What keeps you feeling, I don't know, hydrated, I guess, in life?
For me, it's connection. Feeling connected to nature, to the people I love, even just connected to myself.
I get that.
When I feel those connections are strong, I feel like I can handle anything.
That makes sense. For me, it's connection too, but also creativity. When I'm writing, painting, even just coming up with new ideas, I feel so alive, like my creative well is overflowing.
I love that. It's like we each have our own recipe for keeping our souls hydrated. A mix of things that makes us feel whole and true to ourselves.
That's a great way to put it. And just like with physical hydration, we have to be mindful of what we're taking in, metaphorically speaking, right? Are we surrounding ourselves with things that lift us up? Are we doing things that spark joy?
Such good questions to ask ourselves. It's so easy to get caught up in the day-to-day and forget to feed our souls. But we need that nourishment, just like we need water.
This conversation has been incredible. We went from the science of hydration to philosophy, and it all came back to water. All thanks to you, our amazing listeners, for requesting this deep dive.
It's been a blast. Always love these conversations, exploring these topics with you. It reminds us that learning never stops, and there's always something new to discover, even in the simplest things.
Okay, before we sign off, one last thing. We talked about conscious hydration for our bodies, but what about for our souls? What are those things that quench your thirst for life, for meaning? Think about that. Maybe write down some ideas.
And as you go about your day, pay attention to those things. Notice how they make you feel, how they fill you up, and how you can get more of them in your life.
We'd love to hear what you come up with. Share your thoughts in the comments, send us a message, whatever you like.
And until next time, stay hydrated, stay curious, and keep those inner wells overflowing.
Yeah, we'll see you on the next deep dive.